I saw them both at different times on different tapes.
Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our third in the series of 6 on Overview of the Bible, a Metaphysical History. I've heard reports that the streaming is going fine. However, if it isn't where you are, email mark@truthunity.net, and I encourage you to call at our break at 8 o'clock, 816-301-6304. 816-301-6304. And as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Turn within. And know that as we turn within, we are turning toward the center of our being where we commune with God's presence. In returning and rest, we shall be saved. The I of us is the Savior. It saves us from suffering. And for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness of the one source, the one presence, the one power, the source of infinite good and infinite possibilities in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we remember the truth that there is but one power, one presence, one life, one mind, and we are one with that one. And for an awareness of that truth that sets us free, we are so grateful, and we do give thanks in the name and through the power of the Christ that lives within us all. Amen.
Amen.
Charles Fillmore used to say at the beginning of every class, Jesus Christ is in charge of this class.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jesus Christ, that is, each one of us has a consciousness of God and truth. So Jesus Christ, my consciousness of God and truth, is in charge of this class. Each time I like to review so as to keep the continuity of where we've been and where it is going to end up. I've been saying that the allegories of Genesis are about those basic questions that we ask. For what purpose have I been born? In whatever form, whether it comes casually or reverently, or whether you're not aware you've asked it at all and suddenly one day you get a call. However, in truth, it is God's desire to incarnate in and through us that is waking up. We think it's our thought, but actually it's God working in and through us. And I'm going to tell you the punchline so you'll know where we're going with this. And that is, as we watch the 12 divine faculties wake up individually and then together with other faculties, know that they are to be our channels of expression of the Christ. And the end of the journey is, or the beginning, depending on how you look at it, is we are here, each of us, for the purpose of expressing the Christ fully. That's all of us, same thing. And then individually through a path of service that is according to our particular gifts and skills and frequency of light. Okay. Other questions come up along the way. Of course, we've seen that in those allegories. If we are a creation of God, which we are, then why is there evil in the world? God is absolute good. We have Cain and Abel. Why does Cain kill his brother? You know, that doesn't sound very godlike. Well, there is an ego, a selfish ego. The ego is not a bad thing. It's very necessary, but it's not a good master. It has to be in relationship to spirit. And so, what does God do about evil? Well, there's this process of cleansing, which we saw in the flood. And then, even after the cleansing, there's still an ego that dominates awareness, and we have the Tower of Babel. And so people are scattered, and we find differences, an inability to communicate with one another, even in our own language. Okay, not just different cultures and different languages, but everyone knows how to speak the language of the soul is just a little rusty because it's a silent language. It's a language of truth that is universal and everyone can understand it. All right, that's what the whole first 11 chapters of Genesis is about. It's how come we got here and why is the world the way it is and that sort of thing. Then we start off in chapter 12. We see this same process going on through an individual character. Abraham is called. One day you get a piece of guidance that is unfamiliar to you and yet it's quite compelling. Go start a country. Go to Bongo Land. Go to, I don't know, the East Indies, wherever, and it's something that your conscious mind would never have thought of. And if you're like Abraham, who represents that faculty of faith, you act on it without question. He takes with him his nephew Lot. We carry with us all of the other pieces of consciousness, subconscious. We take our possessions. And you can read through Genesis, the story of Abraham, and watch that faith mature as Abram becomes Abraham and Sarai becomes Sarah. Faith matures, more of a faith-filled spirit, which is what allows them to be willing to sacrifice Isaac. They do not have to, but that's kind of the ultimate in faith, to be willing to sacrifice that which is most dear to you. Then we see another faculty develop, which is the faculty of imagination. The faculty of imagination is represented by Joseph, the 11th son, but the first with Jacob and Rachel. And here we see first the immature use of imagination, the immaturity of talking about these grandiose dreams that you've had, and then through a crisis, how he begins to use his faculty of imagination in ways that actually help other people and winds up in second to Pharaoh in Egypt. We also see how faith and imagination work together through that whole story of Benjamin being in Israel, Joseph being in Egypt. Jacob wants to keep Benjamin with him. Joseph wants the brothers to bring him to Egypt. And in the end, we have faith and imagination working together. This working together of faith and imagination came about because of Jacob and Rachel, the union that was based on love. You remember he had to work 14 years in order to get her. Okay, so that takes us to the end of Genesis, and it gives us an understanding of how the Israelites got to Egypt in the first place, which turns out to be bondage. Whenever we stay in one place too long, we become slaves. to it. When you stop growing and you say, I'm pretty comfortable just the way I am, I think I'll just stay right here. And the universe says, whoop, I don't think so. So nobody remembered Joseph. You know, Joseph was just some CEO of Egypt 400 years ago, or however long it was, 600 years maybe. And so we find in the next phase in Egypt, we find the next thing to develop in our awareness is an understanding of spiritual law. That's what Moses represents, an understanding of spiritual law. And when I say spiritual law, I'm talking about the law of mind action. The law, some call it the law of karma. Some call it the law of action and reaction. And what it means is, to us, is that we come to the realization that we are co-creators. That we, through our thinking, play a role in creating our own experiences. And we see how the people in Egypt, you know, when you first have that desire to be free, it's free from something. It's not free to do something, but it's just like Egypt is pretty oppressive, right? All the babies are being killed, and the Hebrews are being persecuted, and but out of that seemingly negative condition, Moses, drawn from the water, is raised as a royal prince in Pharaoh's court. He has the best education. But here's a case. This is his intellectual development, 40 years. And you can see that it only takes 3 chapters to go through the first 2 phases of Moses' life, each 40 years, and the last 37 are the real purpose of his existence. And so he has that intellectual education. He's well off. It's like Johnson County or something, you know. Every advantage that you could ask for. And then one day, he sees one of his people being persecuted. And he kills the Egyptian and then buries him in the sand. Now, he knows he has done something wrong. How many times have we done something and then try to cover our tracks? And then he goes for the next 40 years, which is like 1.5 chapters, to be a sheep herder in Midian. This is the second phase, the development of spiritual consciousness, tending sheep, thoughts, all right, guiding one's thoughts, very quiet.
You know, you just said something that put something together. Because you wonder later in Exodus, when Jethro comes and visits and tells him that he should appoint other judges, you know, and he explains organization, that maybe him going to Midian, Jethro was very significant in his spiritual development.
Yes, he was a priest.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a priest. Right. And Moses marries Jethro's daughter, Zipporah.
Yeah.
I always want to call her Zip. He marries her, and here he is tending sheep. And here it's like in this quiet pastoral scene, and one day he sees this burning bush. Okay. And it's like, I'm just curious. Well, I wonder what that is, this bush over here. And that's kind of the way we ask a question too. Gee, what was that all about? And so he goes closer and finds that his name is being called, and he's being told to remove the shoes from his feet, that which covers up that direct understanding of the presence of God. Fire represents here the presence of God, which is always burning but does not get consumed. And from here, he receives his call. Oh my, go back to Egypt. Here he has just fled from Egypt. He has to go back to Egypt, confront Pharaoh, and like many of us, when we receive a calling, we say, oh, not me. I'm not equipped to do that. Send Aaron instead. I can't speak. And who shall I say sent me? Who's my authority here? And he receives the divine name of God. I am that I am sent you. Pure being is sending you back to Egypt to free these people. He keeps thinking of reasons why he's not qualified. And finally, he does get to take Aaron with him, who, as you know, becomes the high priest. And so he does. The Passover takes place, the passing over from the land of bondage, from human consciousness, moving in the direction of the promised land. And oh, the first thing that happens, the Red Sea. Huge obstacle. And Moses has been equipped with authority. He has this rod that he holds up, and the waters divide. The Israelites walk across dry land. And the Egyptians are pursuing, because the past tends to pursue us as well. But because we have taken that step of faith, then the Egyptians are drowned as the waters return. I like the story of Nahshon ben Amminadab because he was the first guy into the Red Sea, and he put his feet in, and then he got up to his knees, and then he got up to his waist, and then he got up to his neck, and it wasn't until the water was up to his nose that the waters parted. Faith. Nahshon ben Amminadab, and he's in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew.
Really?
Yeah. Those genealogies, while they sound boring, they're actually quite informative. So that's Nahshon ben Amminadab. So they're in the wilderness and complain. These people are out of their comfort zone. They continually long for the past in Egypt. First, it's the bitter water, and then it's a craving for meat. And they're provided every time they have a need. They go to Moses. Moses prays to the Lord, and it is provided. And this understanding of the law, while it will take you up to the edge of the promised land, it will not get you in. And there's a beautiful farewell passage at the end of Deuteronomy. It's chapter 34, and I just want to read that. Because it not only gives you the reason why Moses can't enter the promised land, the real reason why he can't enter the promised land. And then the next passage that I read will let you know why the people under 20 years of age in the Exodus, over 20 years of age, are not allowed to go into the promised land. Okay, this is Moses. It's in Deuteronomy. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay, here it is. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, on the top of I guess it is.
Pisgah in my Bible.
Pisgah, okay. Which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that the Lord, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your descendants. I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
But no man knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 100, here's your clue, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural forces abated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Okay, so the fact that he lived for 120 years, which may or may not be the actual number, but it means fulfillment. All right, 12, the number of fulfillment with a 0 following it. And he had vision. He had the vision of the good in the promised land. But it's not enough to just see it as a possibility. You have to go into it, and that requires a change of consciousness, which is Joshua, as we will see in our next portion. But not dim of eye. His eyesight, his vision was perfect, and his health, he was strong. So it wasn't because he was deteriorating in health. And when a hero like Moses dies, that means that consciousness then is integrated into the whole being. And the fact that his grave was not found, also a significant detail. No one knows. No one could find where he was buried, all right? Because the Moses understanding of the law is now incorporated, and we now have understanding faith. If you understand how the law works, then you have more faith in working the law yourself, because you know that the law always works the same way. Okay, so that's really the story of Moses. Now, yeah.
His eyes did not dim. So who else else had dim eyes? Leah. And maybe that's not talking to her as a person, but that her eyes were dim, she did not have the vision, and so she did not have an attraction to Jacob because she didn't edify him. She wasn't an edifying person.
She didn't even know she was in bed with him.
Yeah,
I mean, how dim
yeah.
a vision is that?
So it wasn't so much about that wasn't a physical. There is a
Well,
metaphysical
there's a correlation.
Yeah,
yes,
correlation.
There's also
Yeah.
correlation.
Yeah.
Right, and Isaac too. You know, dim of vision, the father of Jacob. Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you see dim of vision, it means vision. You
Yeah.
know? But Moses was not dim of vision, so his vision was quite clear, which means he saw the possibilities of good in the promised land. Now, but seeing the possibility, I can inspire you by telling you the possibilities of meditation or whatever, but that's not giving it to you.
Right.
Okay, you have to actually cross over into it. Now, there's a reason, and I want to read this too, because this is in Numbers. And this is where 12, when Moses in this part is still around. Okay. And he sends 12 spies to go check out this promised land. One from each tribe. Okay. And the majority of the tribes come back with a negative assessment. Okay. And it's really interesting because there's two descriptions of why they can't come. All right. The first one, just people are too big, and you know, and we're not strong enough. We don't have any weapons, and you know, and like that. And then Joshua and Caleb come back saying, "Let's go straight away. Let's go right away. We can see it. We've seen it. We can do it. And yes, it looks like it could be a challenge, but I know we can do it because the Lord is with us." At that, the people have a rebellion. All right? And it says,
Where are you?
I'm in Numbers chapter 14. And here they are talking about, you know, going back to Egypt. Why didn't we stay in Egypt? They're still talking about this. And they said, "Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt."
Whoa.
This is verse 4. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, rent their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread," okay, bread, metaphysical flag there, "for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them, But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. And so the first time when the negative report is given, it's pretty mild. But the second time, just the people are large turned into they are giants. As we talk more and more about difficulties, they grow bigger and bigger, way out of proportion. And it says, and they're like sons of Anak, the giant, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. You project your sense of lack of qualification, your sense of lack of faith and confidence that you can do things even when God is with you. And so they decide they want to stone Caleb. That doesn't happen, of course. But we learn that here's the judgment that comes upon them. And the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, "How long shall this wicked congregation murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the people of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, what you have said in my hearing, I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and all your numbered from 20 years old and upward, you have murmured against me. Not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun."
So
but your little ones, I'm on the next page, number 14 still, verse 26. And so he goes on to say that the reason these people aren't going is because they complain, and their fears have limited their capacity to see good. And if you can't envision it, how can you make use of it? So you can go back over that. So we see Moses has fulfilled his purpose, and the people, so that whole generation of the old has to die out so that the positive, the new stuff can come in. And there's some other wonderful stories in here, in both Numbers and Deuteronomy. Okay, so they go into the promised land. But they make plans, all right? And here's what they do. Actually, Moses makes a plea, and all who murmured die of plague. So they did, all those 20 years old and up. Okay, so Joshua, his name means Jehovah is Savior. That is the I am. Joshua, the I am, same root as Jesus. From the tribe of Ephraim. Now Ephraim is a half tribe with his brother Manasseh, and will and understanding always go together. All right, will and understanding. This is the fourth day of creation. The sun and the moon, the will and the understanding. Okay, so
So that who's the moon? I'm so sorry, the moon.
Well, reflected light, okay?
Who are you talking about? I'm sorry, I missed it. Could you say that
I'm
again?
saying
The whole.
Manasseh and Ephraim. Ephraim represents the will, and Manasseh represents the understanding. Okay. So, the purpose then of Joshua, if we wanted to describe the essence of the consciousness of Joshua, was to bring the children of Israel into a conscious realization of their inheritance. Okay, your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And so a growing awareness of spiritual law brings them right up to the edge of the promised land, where they release the letter of the law and their old understanding of law so that the spirit of the law can be revealed. Okay. So the first stop into the promised land, they have to cross the Jordan. They enter the promised land of Jericho. And so here they use these spies. They go scout it out. Okay. Because here again, it's very similar, parallel to the Red Sea. Right? It's like a barrier between us and our good. And so when the question for us is, when we come to that Jordan within us and we're willing to pass over it, then the difficulties are always minimal when we follow the guidance of spirit. So 2 spies go to scout out Jericho, and they are helped by Rahab. Rahab, who invites them in and tells them exactly what they need to know. Rahab also is in the genealogy of Jesus. She is considered very key. Rahab represents the faculty of love, but a sort of natural human love that is fallen. She's a harlot, so she is in a rather fallen state of love. But for us, when these spies approach, that is, when truth approaches us, when some element of spiritual truth approaches, it's recognized, and she shelters these 2 spies. And what she tells them is that the people of Jericho, remember how they were just frightened of all these huge giants? And she says, they're afraid of you. These people in Jericho are afraid of you, and your God is all powerful. That was exactly what they needed to know. And so before Joshua even got there, Jericho was destroyed. They destroyed it with their own fears. And how often do we destroy our own good through fear of we can't have it, or it will be taken from us, or we are not worthy? Something like that. And so that was good news for them. Now, the scarlet cord, this is an important symbol, because she lives in the wall. Okay, wall. This is an impenetrable wall. Crystallized thought. Rigid. And, it's an obvious barrier. But Rahab lives in the wall, and so living in the wall, she can look outside quite easily, and she can look inside quite easily. And because she has helped them escape from, word gets around that these men have been here, and she lets them down with a scarlet rope. All right, so that rope sort of reminds me of Jacob's ladder, but it's red, and red is the color of life. So the faculty of life. And after they escape and everything, they give her back the scarlet cord so she can put it in their window. So when Jericho falls, all of Rahab's family are saved. Faculty of love lifted up through saving the children of Israel. Okay. Joshua arrives, and the strategy for crossing the Jordan is to have the priests bearing the ark, leading the group. And when their feet touch, the soles of their feet touch the water, that's the sign for the rest of them to follow. The ark representing God's presence, the divinity within us, that spark of divinity, and of course, God was in that little box, that little ark. And the water, that was their resting place. They were to stay there. They were standing, and because they were standing, their feet were standing. That's called firmament of faith. So they were standing in a consciousness of faith. And so everybody went across, and once they got across, they were given instruction to pick up 12 stones, and they had an altar made of these 12 stones, one for each tribe. They went to a place called Gilgal, and there they circumcised all the ones who hadn't been circumcised. All right, and that's a kind of a cleansing of the heart. It's actually described as a purification of the heart. Then they're ready to go, okay? God's presence leading the gang, and they're purified in their heart, and they have very specific instructions. This is all Joshua says, okay, these priests with the ark, they're going to walk around these walls 6 days. They've got trumpets and made out of ram's horns. And on the 7th day, and these trumpets are blaring continuously. And because Joshua is an Ephraimite, we can say that he represents the faculty of understanding. All right? Understanding. And the necessity of purification. So when they blow the trumpets on the 7th day, it's like clearing. You blow the trumpet, and so that clears out everything, and then the people shout, and there's your affirmation. And the walls came tumbling down. Okay. Jesus said the keys to the kingdom: denial and affirmation. and the gates of hell cannot prevail against. And so the walls came tumbling down. I knew the song before I ever read the passage in the Bible. Okay. So that takes us to the other important events. It's almost 8 o'clock, but there are some other important events, because once they're in Jericho, they have difficulty right away, because this little place called Ai, which was supposed to be an easy place to conquer, turns out to be difficult, and they actually lost a lot of men. Here's Jericho, and they got, they had no weapons of war, and so here a lot of Israelites are getting killed over this little, what's supposed to be a little battle, and it turns out that one of the men has, here's again that element of covet, breaking that commandment of coveting, and he takes the spoils that are supposed to go to the temple. Okay? The Israelites have broken all the commandments before they even get to the promised land. And here they are. So you covet what is not yours, and it makes for trouble. And so they flush out the guilty man and stone him to death. And then they go and they conquer that place. Okay, and you can look up Achan or Achan, whatever, and it means trouble. Okay, you break the commandment and you get into trouble. Greed. The task of Joshua is then to divide up the land and apportion it to the various tribes. So all the tribes get a piece of land, except for the Levites. Okay, so remember that the 12 tribes represent the 12 divine faculties, and only the Levites do not have land, because everyone can, this is love, no boundaries to love. Love, everyone has to give to the Levites. All right, so they have a special place. Everybody tithes to the Levites. The Levites can live in any one of these territories that they want.
And they were assigned 48 cities in the territories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. And that's very descriptive of the faculty of love. We can live in any one. Love works with all faculties. In fact, all faculties have to work together with love, because it's love that connects us to the source.
In terms of the numerical symbolism, if you take 12 and divide it by 48 and divide it by 12, you get 4.
Yeah.
So there was a priestly foundation for every tribe.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the Levites.
Right.
Yeah. So the love is the foundation of every place. Faculty of love. But love, in its functioning, has to have judgment. In the next phase, the transition phase we're going to talk about, it's judgment. All these judges are representing our faculty of judgment, and we see in all of these various judges and their stories how our judgment works with various other faculties, and it gives us a very clear picture. They're not all equal, but we can, I like to talk about Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, These are a few of them, Samson. And then Samuel is also a judge who is our transition into the kingdom of David, representing love. It's David who united the kingdom. David, hero, second only to Moses. And I'm not going to go into the uniting the kingdom tonight, but just want to introduce the judges. And if any of you would like to call in, it's 816-301-6304 and ask a question or make a comment or even describe experiences that you've had in this progressive unfoldment that correlates with these stages that are described in the Old Testament. So, anything else you want to say about Joshua?
I fell in love with the end of Joshua, but something that you had mentioned from Numbers 14, that that generation in the wilderness who saw the signs, who saw God work and still did not believe. You do see some progress from those people to Joshua's people. At Joshua 24:31, and Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua and had known the deeds of the Lord. So these people, at least they got as far as those who saw, did believe, and did act, and did obey.
Right.
So that distinguishes Joshua's generation from Moses' generation in that they did learn.
Yes.
They did learn something in the process.
And so, like, we go through a phase and we grow, but we don't always take the next step.
Right. And these guys, they got that far anyway.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
And then I was confused about, who the judges are.
Yeah.
And then,
okay. So the judges, the 12 tribes, they're not one united body.
Right.
It's like a loose confederation. And so the purpose of the judges was, they didn't have a king. They didn't have one ruler. And so there were all these tribes that were warring with one another, but also the Ammonites and the Jebusites and all these various tribes. So there's fighting going on. You need good judgment. So a judge would arise to take care and put out the fire, as it were, in a particular situation. And the first one, Deborah truly is my favorite judge, because you see Deborah sitting under her palm tree, meditating. Okay, palm tree. A palm tree was like, that is everything. Every part of the palm tree is used. The bark, strong fibers. You can eat the dates or the coconuts or the fruit. And they made boats out of palm trees.
You know what I saw in science? And talking because Myrtle Fillmore loves to make, the science of spirit,
Yeah.
But I saw too where they took the pattern of the bark of a palm tree is like what do they call it? How you make a screw, so that it advances something, and so the palm tree inspired the screw, which enabled them to make water to go uphill in the hanging gardens of Babylon.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the palm tree.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And Deborah is described as a bee. Fine discrimination. And she is invited by this general, the Canaanite general, Barak. And she is invited to join with him to fight. I forget.
Yeah, I didn't get that far.
I wasn't intending to talk about it.
Yeah.
But and so she makes a bargain with him. She uses her discernment, and she said, "I won't go with you, but I will support you, and you are to." And she gives her instructions. And
when I was reading the beginning of the Judges, it's funny that in the first 4 chapters of Joshua, it sets up a foundation for the entire rest of the story. And then you get to the Judges, and you see that, for instance, it says that the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites. Manasseh did not take possession of Beth Shean. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites. Zebulun did not drive out the Canaanites. Asher did not. And so you can see where the downfall is going to come from. And the allegory, the meaning for me is that, and it says quite clearly that the Lord left nations to test them. And so we have to continue to what?
Persevere.
To persevere.
Persevere.
And to overcome. And that was really interesting. That.
Yes. That's right. It's not like
it's all done at once.
You go into Jericho and it's done. When did that ever happen? No, but a judge, we tend to think of a judge in a court who makes decisions, but it's more like a temporary leader. And I've heard of a Native American tribe who did this to prevent a king or one person from getting entrenched and having a vested interest in the power of being the ruler. And it's kind of like that they were there to do a particular job, and then they would go home. And it's like faculties are not supposed to fight with one another. They are supposed to work harmoniously, like all parts of a body. What if the heart was fighting with the kidneys and our bodies wouldn't function very well. And so the faculties, Jesus always sent disciples out, 2 or 3. Okay. Never alone, because one faculty alone cannot support the Christ. It takes all 12 to fully express the Christ, to have all the channels open. But even 2 or 3 is enough to support some expression of the Christ.
I was wondering, where did this word judges come from? And then I remembered Jethro and Moses, like I said, and then when you look the description that Jethro gave Moses on how to choose these people who fear God, love truth, and hate dishonest gain.
Yeah.
So there's a good lesson.
It's a very good lesson.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah. And so then it became, then I'm comfortable with the term judges because I understand what it means from what came before. And then you can see the link because, there are some schools of biblical academics where they try to make the Torah separate, but you can see the Exodus flowing over.
Oh, yeah.
The lessons and the guidance, flowing over directly into Joshua and Judges and what happens, and there's a nice continuum.
There is a continuum, and then Samuel, he tries to tell them, you don't want a king.
Yeah.
But you know what? They're not ready. They are not ready to have a king. And
so what pieces of us represent, for instance, the tribes not conquering what they should conquer, the people not wanting to live like separate without a king like the Gentiles.
Well, this is a diagram. If all 12 faculties were working together it would be like a perfect circle.
Gilgal the wheel.
Yeah, there you go. A perfect circle. But until we get there, there are some days when our faith faculty is strong, and other days when it's kind of like Peter, and we're drawn in by the appearance of the storm.
Yeah.
And then it's the same with all of them. Some days we have razor sharp judgment and clarity, and other days our judgment is really poor. And so, there is this imbalance going on until the marriage of Cana. Okay? That comes much later, until there is the harmony between the thinking and the feeling. That is the union that has to take place within our soul that allows the Christ in its fullness to come forth.
So John's transcendent good news has to have this initiation of the marriage feast of Cana.
Yeah.
And then all the signs mean something.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the faculties fighting with one another, and then sometimes our faith faculty fights with our love faculty, but it's these other faculties all stand, these other tribes, like who are the ones that Gideon is fighting? Anyway, they stand for disharmony. So if there's disharmony within the soul, Midianites. So the Midianites, if there's disharmony, then that's going to cause some imbalance between our faculties. And so the Israelites still are fighting these tribes that have inhabited this land that they're in. It's been there from the beginning, and it isn't until David that everything is united, but he did it with force. Okay, and you can't force, Jesus said, your way into the kingdom. Okay. Yeah. And the covenant with David is you would be on the throne forever. And so that's when, the kingdom fell, the United Kingdom fell in less than 100 years. The people said, where's the Messiah? And in one invasion, another invasion. These invasions kept coming, Greeks and Romans, and they were waiting for a Messiah. And it's right here. But the point I was trying to get across last night was that it takes Joseph, an aspect of our thinking nature, to provide an environment, to provide the conditions of protection and nurturing that will allow Mary to express the Christ.
I was looking at, preparing for last night's class, I was looking at the prophecies of the Messiah coming.
Yes, right.
And then you were talking about, what was the collective consciousness of Judaism at that time, and it was apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And if you look at the last 3 verses of Malachi, which is the last 3 verses of the Old Testament,
right,
just before the New Testament, he says, and behold, I'm going to send you Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord.
Right.
And so that sets up the apocalyptic view, except they totally misunderstood it.
Yeah. Well, and then there's all that intertestamental, which is total chaos.
Yeah.
The rebellion of the Maccabees. And various.
Which is in the Apocrypha.
Yes.
That the Catholic Bible supplies.
Yeah. Also, the Big Red Bible, the New Revised Standard, has the Apocrypha.
Oh, does it really?
In it too.
Does it really?
Judith and Susanna and a lot of these stories that you wouldn't hear about otherwise.
And I was looking at the virgin birth deal.
Yeah.
That the reason some people think, some of the academics think that the reason the technical Greek word for virgin was put in was part of the Gospels was because when the Septuagint translated Isaiah, and
Oh,
a
yeah.
young maiden shall bear a
A
son,
young woman, yeah.
they used that word in the
That's
Septuagint,
right.
so that was the word they were used to hearing, and so it got into the Gospels that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
But metaphysically, virgin works
Yes.
because it's the pure,
Undefiled. Yeah.
yeah, undefiled. You know,
Surrender. Yeah.
it's perfect
Yeah.
harmony between thinking and feeling, and you could say, "Let there be light," and there
Yeah.
was light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She just
And
responds.
let's see, 816-301-6304. I invite your questions, comments, or any voice that would like to be heard. If you want to talk, you have to come by the microphone.
Oh, you can't hear me from there?
That's right.
How about right here?
That probably worked.
Can you hear? Because Chuck, you can hear Chuck. So was it a scarlet cord?
Yes.
Did you say? Is that related to the Kabbalistic idea of this? Is it the scarlet thread or not?
Oh, I don't
I'm
know.
not sure the words are that.
But I
But
know
what's the
that,
significance of the scarlet?
well, the red
Right.
is the color of the faculty of life. And
Okay.
it's located in the root chakra. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The color of the root chakra. This is Rahab, the
Yeah.
harlot. Okay.
Right.
And there is a reference to scarlet in the cure for leprosy, which is hyssop, and this is in Leviticus 14, and I know this because it's oils, and hyssop and aloes, cedar wood and sandalwood and scarlet stuff. So
Scarlet stuff.
we don't know what scarlet stuff is.
Uh-huh.
It sounds like it ought to be an oil or a plant, but the fact that it's scarlet has that faculty of life-giving properties to it. So I don't know, but it's the rope that can let people down from the wall and that can let people in to the city.
Right. Okay. I can check because I've got a book or had a book somewhere on that scarlet.
Yeah,
thread.
the scarlet thread. Well, it's good,
I-
the thread of life perhaps moving through the fabric.
You got these two courses going on parallel now.
Yeah,
the Jesus sayings. And so as I'm reading, because I'm telling you, I think everybody should go back. If you haven't read anything in Joshua, read chapter 23.
I love Joshua, yes.
Read chapter, but at 23:12, on the other side, it says, if you ever go back and cling to the rest of the nations which remain, God will not continue to drive these nations out from before you. But he says, if you ever go back, and you know what? I thought immediately of when Jesus said, no one after putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God.
Yes, right.
And I never understood that entirely until I read that in Joshua in 23:12. If you ever go back to those nations which remain, I will not continue to drive them out from before you. And it's a perfect parallel
Yeah.
between the Jesus sayings and Joshua. Another link between
Yes.
Joshua and Jesus.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, their message, their instruction.
And it's Charles Fillmore says that Joshua, it's a matter of degree of expression of the Christ presence, which makes sense because it's at an earlier stage, but it's the where we still need guidance to complete the work. Whereas Jesus is kind of the finished product.
I love Joshua's language, when he says, He says,
Where are
he's,
you?
I'm in Joshua 23, and I'm at verse 8. But you are to cling to the Lord your God.
Oh,
Cling to the Lord your
yes,
God.
right. Oneness, love, yeah.
And then he says, you know in your hearts, at verse 14, and you know in your souls that not one word of the Lord your God spoke has failed. All have been fulfilled.
Mm.
You know, there's so much beauty in this
there-
chapter of Joshua.
There really is. Well, you know, one thing that I think you can take, and what Jesus took from Deuteronomy, you know, the first commandment in Exodus, it's you shall have not any other God before me, right?
Yeah.
It's phrased in the negative,
Mm-hmm.
but in Deuteronomy, it's hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love God with all your heart, with all your mind.
Yeah.
And
the Shema 6:1.
yeah, 6:4.
Yeah. Here is 6:1,
is
and then it goes down through. Yeah. I think is it 6:4? It is. You're probably right. But like you did tonight, what Joshua did in chapter 24, he reviews the history summary real quickly. You know, so they don't forget the important stuff.
So they don't forget the steps.
Yeah.
You know, and as we go along, you know, and the judges, and next time, nobody wants to talk, you know, nobody except for you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, it makes it more interesting for me if I have somebody talk.
I have a
What, come? You have to be in here.
I find it helpful and to use this New American Bible just because they do a nice summary at the beginning. And I'm sure that you're using which one, the Harper?
I'm using the New American Standard.
New American Standard. And I know that some of the Unity people like the New Revised.
No. Revised Standard. Mine is the Harper Study Bible because it has all the cross references to where all these ideas you can find.
And this one.
Is that the Catholic Bible?
Well, this is it's has the imprimatur, and that's not necessarily why I'm using it, but it's very scholarly. So they talk about that the book of Joshua depicts this conquest of the land as in a stylized fashion that they're saying probably, it says the artificial formalized description of the destruction of the towns, and it's pretty brutal too. And they're saying that it's not necessarily meant to be taken literally, which is interesting for Catholics. And that the book was not written for quite some time until after these events, and so it's I'll have to look exactly. There's a quote that I wanted to find, but maybe you have a comment on that.
Well, it's funny that they've come around to a sort of a metaphysical attitude, like it's not literal.
Well, here it says, as addressed to the needs of a pre-exilic audience, then the book should be read not so much as imparting information about how Israel took over the land of Canaan many centuries before the composition of the book, but rather as a teaching a lesson about how Israel is to avoid losing the land because of the conflicts. And,
I don't know what to say about that.
Okay. It seems like a bit of an intellectual stretch.
Well, it wasn't until I was introduced to metaphysics that I understood this whole annihilation thing. Because if you take it metaphysically, and if you take it symbolically, what it's saying is that everything that would separate us from our image likeness needs to be annihilated.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes sense.
Right. So they also talk about how the account of Joshua about how Israel's early history is different than that in the book of Judges, which shows a more gradual emergence rather than a sudden,
I
conquering.
don't think Joshua
No.
talks about a sudden emergence. Joshua has a very hard time.
Because Joshua talks about, or is it Judges?
It is that the land wasn't completely conquered during the time of Joshua,
No.
so that those remaining could be tested and
So-
to experience conquest themselves. And so
Well,
it wasn't a total conquest.
It wasn't in Judges.
Wish I
That's
could
why
find that.
they had judges. They chose one person from the tribe, each tribe, to be a judge and take care of difficulties that continued to exist between these foreign tribes and between their own tribes.
Yeah, it says here, I'm in Judges 2, 21 and 22, 23. It says, the nations which Joshua left when he died were left in order to test Israel, whether they would keep the way of the Lord and walk as their fathers did or did not. So the Lord allowed the nations to remain and did not drive them out quickly.
Yes.
And that's Judges 2:23. He
Yeah.
did not.
Judges, that's what I'm saying. Judges describes a more gradual.
Well, but Joshua left those nations unconquered for that reason.
Yeah.
So it does connect back to Joshua.
Yeah,
It was not a total conquest. Yeah.
he didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
And then even David, David.
Well, yeah, they describe return of Transjordan tribes and Joshua's farewell near the last third of the last part of the book.
Yeah. Those three tribes. He talks about. He let them. Remember, because in the beginning of Joshua, he tells them that they can't. In Joshua 1:10 through 15. He tells those tribes that they have to stand with their brothers and finish the battle on the west side of Jordan before they can return to the east side of Jordan. And then at the end of Joshua, he allows them to return after the western lands have been conquered. Then he allows them to return.
Right.
So there's where the faculties are fighting together
Yes.
and are not divided. The
Yes.
faculties are working together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he holds them to that covenant to work,
Right.
and then he gives them the promise
Yes.
and lets them go occupy their cities.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
816-301-6304 if you would like to join in this conversation on Joshua and Judges, which we will go more fully into next week, and move on into Samuel.
Did you since we got a few minutes,
Yeah, we have time.
have you thought about in Joshua chapter 20 and that's about the refuge cities?
Oh, yeah.
For a man who has killed someone, but he didn't premeditate and he didn't hate the person, just something that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on those refuge cities?
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And
That there's always a place within us that is protected, no matter what you have done. There is nothing so bad that can destroy that safe haven within you. Place of refuge. It's the heart. It's the divine spark. The higher self, the Christ self.
Mhm.
I think it's where the idea that churches were, places where people could take refuge if they had committed crimes. I think it's like the temple of your heart. That's what it would be.
I just thought that some things happen outside of the laws of karma. Action, reaction, mind action. Those that can't be defined within those rigid definitions. And if something happens there that you happen to be a victim of, there is still a way to come back.
Absolutely, because just going into the silence softens the karma. that you
Right.
may have accumulated
Right.
in the past.
Right.
It's described as roasting the seeds. You know, if you roast seeds, they
Right.
don't grow. So,
Right.
and so maybe the memory of something is still there, but it doesn't, you know, blossom into a full blown incident.
And I thought it was interesting that even if you have to take refuge in a refuge city because of something that has occurred,
Uh-huh.
that there's still a limited time where you would have to take refuge because like in the life of the judge in that city, once that judge has died, then that person is released to go back to their home city.
Oh.
And so
okay.
and
I'll have to think about this.
yeah, and so even if that happens, and even if you have to take refuge in a refuge city, you're not doomed to have to stay there forever. You can there's a time,
Okay.
and there's a process, and when that's completed, then you can go back to your homeland. You can go back to your home
I
city,
think
your home house.
it's like a place within you that is always accepting of yourself as divine.
And you never lose your home.
And you never lose your home. And so you can wander. It's 8:21 or 7.
27 probably.
It's 8:27 and no one has called and my phone does work. So I'll invite you to close your eyes for a moment and consider this journey that is ongoing. It is reminiscent of the beginning of unity, which was a teaching for self-exploration. That a connection with the silence in our own being reveals the steps at whatever stage we are, reveals the step to move forward and upward into that higher calling of full expression of the Christ. And for that awareness, we are grateful and we say, thank you, God.
Amen.
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 So I hope that next week we will continue with Judges. We will continue with Judges, and we will look at how the faculty of judgment works with other faculties, and which got into difficulty. I'm thinking of Jephthah, who represents the faculty, his judgment. But love, when love is involved, there's a lack of judgment. You know, judgment and love have to be balanced in order for wisdom to come forth. So we'll talk about that and see how the time goes. I want to also make that transition into the unified kingdom of Israel. And then we'll get to talking about a few of the kings and prophets that came out of the exile, prophets, the early prophets, the latter prophets. So much more to cover. So for all of you out there, I do wish that you would call in or at least email me and let me know that this is a topic that you enjoy. Also, I would like to announce to you there is a meditation retreat that will be the 27th and 28th of May. Please email me if you are interested in that. And so I think that's it for this